In the winter of 1895, Dr. Alistair Rook, a physician in the bustling, soot-choked mill city of Lowell, Massachusetts, noted a disturbing pattern in his private case files. Over the previous year, he had been called to the homes of 3 separate, respectable families to treat their recently adopted children. The cases were eerily similar, a trinity of quiet tragedy. The children, all between the ages of 7 and 10, had begun to exhibit a rapid, inexplicable decline that baffled medical science. They refused to eat, their bodies wasting away despite their parents' frantic pleas. They stopped speaking to their new families, retreating into a profound, unreachable silence. And they would spend hours a day staring into empty corners of the room, their lips moving in a constant, unheard whisper, as if in conversation with someone who wasn't there. Rook, a man of science and rationalism, had diagnosed them with the vague, inadequate terms of his era: wasting sickness and childhood dementia and nervous exhaustion. All 3 children died within 6 months of their adoption. The detail that haunted Dr. Rook, the detail he recorded in a locked medical journal that he later ordered sealed for 50 years after his death, was the single chilling thread connecting these tragedies. All 3 children had been adopted from the same esteemed institution, the St. Jude's Home for Foundlings. And each of their grieving, bewildered parents reported the same unnerving phenomenon. The child's decline began the moment they started speaking of their invisible friend. Before we delve into the full disturbing history of St. Jude's and the secret it held within its brick walls, I want to ask you something. If you believe the darkest stories are often the ones that have been most deliberately forgotten, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is dedicated to uncovering them. And I want to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment with your state or country. It helps me understand where these lost histories are finding a new home. Now let's go back to Lowell, Massachusetts, and the respected Catholic institution that stood at the center of a silent, terrifying epidemic. Lowell in the 1890s was a city of stark contrasts. It was a marvel of American industry, its massive textile mills lining the Merrimack River, their smokestacks belching a constant plume of black smoke that colored the sky a permanent hazy gray. But this industry was fueled by a vast, impoverished workforce, largely composed of immigrants who lived in crowded, unsanitary tenements. Disease was rampant. Tuberculosis, cholera, and influenza were constant specters. Industrial accidents in the mills maimed or killed workers with horrifying regularity, leaving behind a tragic abundance of orphans and abandoned children. Into this world of soot and suffering, St. Jude's Home for Foundlings was seen as a beacon of Catholic charity. Opened in 1882, it was housed in a formidable 4-story red brick building on a hill overlooking the poorest districts. It was run by an order known as the Sisters of Perpetual Mercy, under the stern and efficient leadership of a woman known only as Mother Agnes. In the public eye, St. Jude's was a model institution. Newspaper articles praised its cleanliness, its discipline, and its success in placing children with good Christian families. Adoption records filed neatly at the county courthouse showed hundreds of successful placements. The orphanage's internal mortality rate, a key metric of institutional success, was remarkably low for the period. St. Jude's was, by all appearances, a place that saved children. But Dr. Alistair Rook's private journal, rediscovered in the archives of the Massachusetts Medical Society in 1968, tells a different story. The institution presents a facade of perfect health, he wrote in a precise, angry hand in January of 1896. It boasts of its low mortality, of its success in nurturing the bodies of these lost children. Yet the children it sends out into the world seem to wither on the vine. It is as if they carry a sickness with them from that place, a sickness of the soul that does not manifest until they have left the orphanage walls and entered the warmth of a loving home. Rook's investigation began not as a crusade but as a quiet academic exercise. A man of logic, he was troubled by a puzzle he could not solve. He started by discreetly cross-referencing city death certificates from the previous 2 years, with the adoption records from St. Jude's. He found not 3 but 9 other cases of adopted children dying under similar mysterious circumstances. The official causes of death were varied and vague: marasmus, failure to thrive, infantile neurasthenia. But in every case where he could locate and interview the family, the story was the same: a quiet, withdrawn child who seemed unable to bond with their new family. A sudden and intense attachment to an unseen friend. A rapid descent into psychological isolation, self-starvation, and death. The case that solidified the pattern for Rook was that of Thomas Miller. He had been called to the Miller home in the autumn of 1895. The Millers were a respectable family. Mr. Miller was a foreman at the Appleton Mill. Unable to have children of their own, they had adopted Thomas, an 8-year-old boy from St. Jude's, in July. Rook's journal entry from his first interview with the family is chilling in its detail. October 12, 1895. Visited the Miller household to consult on their son, Thomas. The boy is emaciated, his skin pale and stretched over his small bones. He sits in a chair in the parlor, staring at the wall, and does not acknowledge my presence. Mrs. Miller is distraught. She states that for the first month, Thomas was a model child, quiet, polite, obedient. Then, in late August, he began to speak of a friend. I quote her directly: "He told us his friend's name was the Helper. He said the Helper came from St. Jude's with him to make sure he was good. At first, we thought it was a charming, fanciful game, an imaginary playmate to ease his transition. But the game grew dark." Mr. Miller states that Thomas began to attribute every decision to this Helper. "The Helper doesn't like green beans," he would say, pushing his plate away. "The Helper says it is too loud in here," he would whisper before retreating to his room. Then came the secrets. Thomas told his mother that the Helper told him secrets about us, his new parents, that we did not truly love him, that we would soon grow tired of him and send him back. The friend became a source of paranoia, a whispering voice confirming the child's deepest fears of abandonment. The final break occurred 2 weeks ago. When Mr. Miller attempted to embrace his son, Thomas recoiled in terror, screaming that his friend did not like to be touched by outsiders. He has not spoken a word to Mr. and Mrs. Miller since. He communicates only with the empty air beside him. He has ceased to eat almost entirely. My physical examination reveals no organic cause for his condition. His body is starving, but the disease, I am convinced, is in his mind. Thomas Miller died on November 3, 1895. Rook had documented a dozen such cases. In each, the parents described the friend in chillingly similar terms. It was not a playful, childlike, imaginary companion. It was described as a whisper, a shadow, a silent guide, a watcher. It was an entity that demanded loyalty, punished disobedience through guilt, and systematically isolated the child from their new family. Armed with this terrifying pattern, Dr. Rook requested a formal meeting with Mother Agnes at St. Jude's. He was granted an audience in her severe, sparsely furnished office. He described her in his journal as a woman of formidable certainty, with eyes like chips of flint. She stands as straight as a column, radiating an aura of unimpeachable moral authority. Rook laid out his findings: a dozen children from her institution, all dead within months of adoption, all exhibiting the same bizarre psychological symptoms. He asked to review the medical histories of these children from their time at the orphanage, hoping to find some common thread, a shared illness, a dietary deficiency, some environmental toxin. The response he received was polite, formal, and absolute. "Dr. Rook," Mother Agnes told him, her voice calm and cold. "Our records are a matter of sacred trust between this institution, the child, and God. To open them for outside review would be a violation of that trust, I assure you. Every child who leaves St. Jude's does so in perfect physical and spiritual health, confirmed by our own attending physician. Their welfare once they are with their new families is sadly beyond our control. Perhaps the issue lies not with the children we provide, but with the homes they are sent to." The implication was clear. It was a failing of the parents, not the institution. She had built an unbreachable wall of institutional silence and bureaucratic piety. Rook noted in his journal that night, "She feels no guilt. She believes no wrong has been done. This is not a conspiracy of malice in her mind. It is a defense of her faith in her own work. It makes her more dangerous than any common criminal." Frustrated and blocked by the church, Rook turned his investigation to the building itself. An institution, he reasoned, is a reflection of its purpose. If St. Jude's held a secret, it might be written in its very architecture. He spent weeks in the city planning office, poring over old blueprints and municipal filings. He found the original architectural plans for the orphanage, filed in 1881, a year before it opened. He studied them for days, comparing them to the existing structure as best he could from the outside. And then he found it, a discrepancy. The original plans showed a series of 6 small, windowless rooms in the sub-basement, an area below the main cellar. They were clearly designated on the blueprint as cold storage provisions. But on a revised plan, submitted and approved in 1885, 3 years after the orphanage opened, this entire section of the sub-basement was different. A thick, new wall had been drawn, sealing the area off completely. The 6 small rooms were gone, replaced by a single large, inaccessible space labeled simply as foundation. It was an architectural lie. A section of the building had been deliberately erased from the official record, walled off and hidden from view. Why would an orphanage need to seal a part of its own basement? What were they trying to hide? The question gnawed at him for weeks. He considered going to the police, but what could he tell them? That he had a hunch based on a dozen deaths with no provable link and a strange notation on an old blueprint? He would be dismissed as a crank, a man with a grudge against the Catholic Church. Then in the spring of 1896, the first anonymous letter arrived at his clinic. It was slipped under his door in the middle of the night. It was written on cheap common paper in a shaky, disguised hand, the letters slanted and uncertain. "You are right to be asking questions about St. Jude's. The sickness is not in the children, it is put into them. They are not born with their friends, they are given them. The place you are looking for is real. We were told to call it the solace chamber. God forgive us all." The solace chamber. The name was new, and it sent a chill down Dr. Rook's spine. It sounded benevolent, therapeutic. But coming from an anonymous, terrified source, it felt like a euphemism for something monstrous. The letter gave him the confirmation he needed. The hidden rooms were real and they had a name, but it also posed a new, horrifying question. If the friends were being given to the children, how was that possible? What was happening in the dark, walled-off sub-basement of St. Jude's orphanage? What was the solace chamber? The anonymous letter was a key, but it opened a door into a darker room than Dr. Rook could have possibly imagined. The solace chamber. The name was a masterpiece of institutional euphemism, cloaking a terrible function in the language of comfort. Rook now knew where the secret of St. Jude's was hidden. But he still didn't understand what that secret was. How could an invisible friend be given to a child? The question bordered on the supernatural, a realm Rook, as a man of science, was deeply uncomfortable with. He suspected a form of psychological manipulation, but the mechanism eluded him. For weeks he hit a wall of silence. No further letters arrived. His discreet inquiries around the city yielded nothing. The Catholic Diocese of Boston, which oversaw St. Jude's, refused to grant him another meeting. He was an outsider, a Protestant doctor meddling in the affairs of the church, and the institution was closing ranks against him. He recorded in his journal his growing despair. "I am a man shouting at a fortress. The walls are high and the sentries are deaf to my pleas. And inside I am convinced children are being destroyed, yet I lack the proof to breach the gate." The breakthrough came from a place of profound human guilt. In July of 1896, Rook was approached by a young woman named Clara, a former novitiate nun who had served at St. Jude's for 2 years before abruptly leaving the Sisters of Perpetual Mercy. She met with Dr. Rook in secret in a public park after dusk, terrified that she was being watched. Her testimony, which Rook transcribed verbatim into his journal, pages that are stained with what appear to be water spots from his own tears, is the key that unlocks the horror of the solace chamber. "You must understand, Mother Agnes," Clara began, her voice a strained whisper. "In her own mind, she is not a monster. She is a savior. She truly believes that the primary wound of an orphan is not hunger or lack of shelter, but a spiritual one. She called it the void in the soul, a hollowness left by the abandonment of their parents. She believed this void made the children susceptible to all manner of sin, to loneliness that festered into melancholy, to a defiance that led to a life of crime and damnation. Her life's work, her obsession, was to find a cure for it. The cure was the solace chamber." Clara confirmed Rook's suspicion. The walled-off rooms in the sub-basement were real. She had been taken there once during her training. "They are small, like cells," she said, her hands trembling. "The walls are thick stone and the doors are heavy wood padded with horsehair and canvas to make them soundproof. There is no light, none at all. When that door closes, the world disappears." According to Clara, children who were deemed at risk were taken to these rooms for what Mother Agnes called solace therapy. The at-risk children were not the overtly rebellious one. They were the opposite. They were the quiet ones, the melancholic, the withdrawn, the ones who grieved too long for the parents they'd lost. Mother Agnes saw this deep-seated sadness as a dangerous vulnerability. "The treatment had 2 parts, Clara explained, her voice dropping lower. "First, deprivation. The child was placed in the chamber for days, sometimes a week. It was perfectly dark, perfectly silent. They were fed simple meals passed through a slot in the door, but they had no human contact. Mother Agnes called it the emptying. It was meant to break their attachment to the outside world, to quiet their minds, to make them receptive. This practice, now known to modern psychology as sensory deprivation, was a form of profound psychological torture. A child alone in absolute silence and darkness would quickly become disoriented, terrified and desperate for any form of stimulus, any human connection. After the emptying, the second part of the therapy would begin, conditioning. After several days of silence, Clara whispered, Mother Agnes would begin speaking to the child, not in person. There was a small metal tube, a speaking pipe, that ran from her private office down into the chambers. Her voice would come as a whisper in the darkness. She was a master of altering her voice, making it sound ethereal, genderless. She would not identify herself as Mother Agnes. She would introduce herself as a silent companion, a guardian spirit, a secret friend sent by God to protect the child from the loneliness of the world. For hours a day, for days on end, Mother Agnes would whisper to the child in the dark. She would tell the child they were special, chosen. She would tell them that she was a secret friend no one else could know about, a friend who would always be with them, who would keep them safe, who would guide their thoughts and actions. She would praise them for their obedience and gently chastise them for any memory of defiance. She was, quite literally, programming a new consciousness into the child's traumatized, receptive mind. She was deliberately inducing a complex auditory hallucination. It worked, Clara confessed, her voice finally breaking, tears streaming down her face. When the children came out of the chambers, they were different. The sadness was gone. They were calm, docile, obedient, and they would whisper to their new friend. They seemed content. We were told it was a miracle. Mother Agnes saw it as a triumph. She believed she had done the impossible. She had given them a permanent divine companion to guide them to a life of piety and obedience. She had invented a guardian angel they could actually hear. But the guardian angel was a demon in disguise. It was a parasitic psychological construct born of trauma and isolation. Inside the controlled, structured, and emotionally sterile environment of the orphanage, the delusion was manageable. The friend reinforced the rules of the institution. But once the child was adopted into the unpredictable, emotionally rich environment of a new family, the construct became malignant. The friend would become jealous and possessive, Dr. Rook theorized in his journal, his writing a furious scrawl. This voice, which had been the child's only companion in the darkness, its only source of comfort, would perceive the new parents as a threat. It would see their love as a rival for the child's affection and loyalty. It would begin to whisper poison into the child's ear, fostering paranoia, demanding absolute secrecy, systematically isolating the child from any new bonds of human affection. The child, trapped in an unwinnable psychological war between the real world outside and the powerful, persuasive voice inside, would suffer a complete psychotic break. The wasting sickness was the physical manifestation of a mind devouring itself from within. These children were not dying of a disease, they were dying of their cure. Dr. Rook now had the full, monstrous picture. It was not a supernatural haunting, it was a story of profound, systematic, and religiously motivated psychological abuse. Mother Agnes, in her quest to save souls, had perfected a method for destroying minds. Armed with Clara's testimony, which he had her sign in the presence of a trusted notary, Rook bypassed the local authorities he knew would protect the church. He went directly to the Massachusetts State Board of Health and to the publisher of the Boston Globe. He presented his findings, including the anonymous letters, the architectural blueprints, and the sworn affidavit from the former nun. The reaction was not the public explosion he had expected. It was a quiet, panicked implosion. The church, a powerful political force in Massachusetts, moved with ruthless efficiency to contain the scandal. Within a month, Mother Agnes was quietly transferred to a remote, cloistered convent in Quebec for health reasons. She was never seen in Lowell again. The young nun, Clara, who had spoken to Rook, disappeared. Her family was told she had been sent to the same convent to live a life of contemplative prayer, though no record of her arrival ever surfaced. St. Jude's home for foundlings was officially closed in the spring of 1899, the diocese citing insurmountable financial difficulties and the building's structural decline. The building itself was sold and torn down within 3 years, replaced by a textile warehouse, erasing the physical evidence of what had happened there. The official cause of death for the dozen children Dr. Rook had identified was never re-examined. The story was successfully and completely buried. Dr. Alistair Rook himself was systematically discredited. The diocese released a statement suggesting he was a sensationalist with a known anti-Catholic prejudice. Rumors were spread through the medical community that he was unstable, that his investigation was the product of a personal obsession. His medical practice suffered as patients, particularly those from the large Irish Catholic community, abandoned him. His colleagues at Lowell General Hospital, fearing political and professional repercussions, began to shun him. He had uncovered the truth, and the institution had closed ranks to bury him with it. He died in 1915, a man broken by his own righteous crusade. His career was in ruins, his reputation tarnished. His story was known only to those few who would one day read the locked journal he left behind, a final testament in a world that refused to listen. There is a final, haunting postscript to this story. The practice in the solace chamber began in 1885 and continued, according to Clara's testimony, until at least 1898. Over those 13 years, it is impossible to know how many children were subjected to Mother Agnes's horrifying cure. It is possible that hundreds of children were sent out into the world, each carrying a whispering, invisible friend in their minds. How many of them survived into adulthood? Did the voice fade over time, or did they learn to live with it, a secret, lifelong companion? Did they marry? Did they have children of their own, raising them while a voice from their past whispered guidance and paranoia in their ear? The invisible friends of St. Jude's were a psychological virus released into the world with each adoption. The full extent of the outbreak, the generations of families who may have been silently affected by this inherited trauma, will never be known. The story of St. Jude's is not a story of ghosts. It is the story of a horror far more real, the horror of good intentions twisted into an instrument of profound cruelty. It is a testament to the terrifying power of institutional silence and the ease with which the most vulnerable can be sacrificed to protect the reputation of the powerful. The children of St. Jude's were not haunted by spirits from the great beyond. They were haunted by a voice that was deliberately implanted in the architecture of their own minds. A ghost that could never be exorcised because it was a part of them. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying kind of haunting there is.